Hello, everyone. On behalf of Women in Global Health Georgia and in honor of International Women's Day, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, The Art of Failing Forward, Harnessing Our Non-Successes for Professional Development. My name is Alyssa Lowe. I am very excited and honored to be joining Rachel Hall Clifford as co-chair of Women in Global Health's Georgia chapter this year. For those of you who might be new to Women in Global Health, WGH is a global movement with the largest network of women and allies working to challenge power and privilege for gender equity in health. WGH aims to enable women from around the world to engage in national and global levels in policy development and leadership, and it advocates for women's inclusion in global health decision-making. The WGH Georgia chapter, which launched in January of 2021, is hosted by the Center of Global Health Innovation, a nonprofit organization based here in Atlanta. Now, I'm very excited to introduce today's speakers, two women who I am privileged to call mentors, colleagues, and good friends. Our first speaker is Lenette Golding. Dr. Golding is a recognized leader in the field of global health with more than 20 years of experience providing technical and scientific leadership in the areas of social and behavior change and community health. She has worked in a wide range of cultural, geographic, and operational contexts. Her work is guided by the culture-centered approach, which promotes organizational and community partnerships. She's passionate about strengthening SBC research and programming capacity. Dr. Golding is a senior advisor at Save the Children and teaches health communication at Georgetown University and lectures at Emory University. Welcome, Lenette. Our second speaker is Amy Callis. Amy is an award-winning leader in strategic planning, health communication, and emergency preparedness. She has led public health projects on 5 continents in more than 22 countries. Her work spans a variety of public health issues, including outbreaks, immunization, girls' empowerment, and nutrition. Amy has also worked in a variety of emergency spaces, ranging from COVID-19 response in the Darfur genocide to the West African Ebola outbreak and polio eradication in Afghanistan. She specializes in consensus building, program innovation, and visual communication for behavior change. Lenette and Amy, thank you both for joining us today. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Golding, who will get us started.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. I was excited when you mentioned it to me, and it's just a pleasure to be here. I'm gonna share my screen and share my slides. Let me get those up. Bear with me, technology. Here's the slow computer not responding. Oh, grandfather. Oh, it's just not gonna go. Is it gonna go?
It's trying.
I know. It's time for a new computer. Poor
there it
grandfather.
is. You can see it.
Okay. All right. Well, so I agreed to tell my story today because I believe that sharing examples that are not fit for publication or ones that otherwise just die undocumented really can yield valuable lessons. And the more we share our private failures so that others can learn, more quickly we can find ways that work. But let's face it, it can be really uncomfortable to talk about failure. And that's why today I'm going to reframe my team's story of failure and instead embrace my team's near win. It was a near win. And really the way we view what we're experiencing can greatly increase our stress, or it can minimize it. Cognitive reframing is a time-honored, psychologist recommended method of looking at things in ways that create less stress and promote a greater sense of peace and control. Now, some ways to frame failure are like this. When your best just isn't good enough is is one way you can look at failure. Or, failure is the key to success. Each mistake teaches us something. I believe that. I often like to say when things don't go exactly the way I wanted them to, how fascinating, right? And learn from that. So that's what I've actually have named my presentation today. It's how fascinating. That's what the story is. So you've probably heard stories about Thomas Edison. Often you hear a lot about his success, but Thomas Edison really provides an excellent example of cognitive reframing. Edison tried hundreds of materials before discovering that bamboo fiber could serve as a light bulb filament. And when he was asked how it felt to fail so much, he reportedly answered, I have not failed 700 times. I have not failed once. I have succeeded in proving that those 700 ways will not work. And when I have eliminated the ways that will not work, I will find the way that will work. So just like Edison has tinkered with his filaments to see which produced a bright and lasting light, we global health and development practitioners, really, we tinker with our interventions and monitoring and evaluation to see what will produce meaningful and reliable knowledge. And so my story begins when I was working on a project that used community-led monitoring as a way, as a means to really improve community health service delivery. Now, for those of you that don't know, community-led monitoring is an organized way of collecting ongoing or reoccurring data at the community level to be used by that same community for planning, for budgeting, for implementing collective action, for advocacy, for more monitoring and evaluation to figure out how they're doing. So when we started this project, the team's assumption was that it would be possible to train the communities on community-led monitoring process to collect data and to make decisions about health services. And then we could step away and the process would be sustainable because after all, the communities we were working with were both entitled to and interested in quality health services. So by implication, we thought they were inherently incentivized to participate in and support community-led activities. Now, community-led monitoring is paramount importance to ensure community participation and accountability and transparency in delivery of health services. And whether communities have limited power to lodge program-specific feedback, like a complaint handling system, or they have extended power to exercise sanctions like budget endorsements by local health management committees. Communities jointly contribute in making service providers, making sure that they're held accountable for their actions, and by making themselves open and really visible to public scrutiny. Service providers, in turn, remain vigilant to changing community preferences and demands and become a learning organization that really can change and adapt in response to community-led monitoring. Now, all that sounds good, right? That said, there are several key requisites to making community-led monitoring an effective intervention for improving both quality and accountability. First, and probably most obvious, is that community-led monitoring, it has to be owned by the communities, right? And second, there really needs to be some organization around effective monitoring. And third, there needs to be a focus on generating political will and accountability. So just to kind of dive deeper in what it all entails. So, because it's part of the story, so just bear with me if you're not interested in community-led monitoring, but it requires several stages of development to create and implement processes in support of collective action. In a nutshell, the initial requirement is a clear definition of the problem to be addressed, as well as defining the goal and objectives associated with the resolution to the problem. And then the collective group needs to determine the measures and the potential indicators to employ and how to collect the data. And also at this second stage, the collective group will also need to create a data subgroup that will have the authority and responsibility for collecting and managing data. And this subgroup will need to develop appropriate data collection instruments and provide training to those who will compile the information and complete the forms. And additionally, this subgroup will need to create a monitoring plan and timelines for data submissions and reports, and a data management process or processes, and also how to go about analyzing all that data. And then the larger community stakeholder collective group will continue to feed into this process via discussion opportunities at meetings and having real-time access to sharing platforms, whether that be on a blackboard in a chief's yard or on a digital platform or some way. So what I just outlined is just one part of the recipe, and probably it is just as important is relationship building. And really, the success and failure of community-led monitoring is determined by the interaction of really these three dynamic forces of time, turf, and trust. And here's where our team failed big time. First, we tried to rush the process for this particular example. The project, we only had 1.5 years left when we started this community-led monitoring process. And as you can imagine, it takes time and effort to develop a working relationship. And it's also important to note that in this particular context, there was serious quality of care issues with community health service providers really treating patients poorly. And in return, the community members, they didn't seek services at primary healthcare clinics, and they didn't trust healthcare providers at the clinic to give them quality of care. So they sought services elsewhere. And secondly, in our rush, we failed to facilitate the process in a way for the community and the service providers to form a partnership. We were really focused more on the technical aspects of community-led monitoring, like how to go about collecting data and how to store it and how to analyze it. Now, in terms of turf, collaboration only works when community members and healthcare providers both contribute to and benefit from the effort. And when there is a perception of imbalance, imagined or real, tied to the benefits of the collaboration, the process for working together might stall, like in this case, or the partner who feels disadvantaged might leave the collaborative. Now, in this case, in this example, the community felt their role served the aims of the project and the service providers, not them. And this was because there was some doubt about whether or how the feedback or data was being acted upon. And in the end, it led to indifference and withdrawal from the process for some. Some people just gave up. And the community members just didn't see the change happening. And they thought it was just business as usual. So community ownership of community-led monitoring, it really depends on the community's confidence that data or feedback are linked to concrete changes in service provision or service environment. So to correct for this, it took sustained investments on our part to engage and empower community members, not just in the process of data collection, but also through the process of data analysis and action and dissemination of community-led monitoring outcomes. And the project that started this work ended, but luckily the community-led monitoring process did not. Fortunately, the project won a follow-on, and we were able to continue the work that we started. And we were able to train more communities on the community-led monitoring process and take that time to build those relationships, and to collect data and make decisions about health services. And I'm glad to say that eventually we were able to step away and have the work continue. In some cases, not in all communities. All that said, most of these issues really could have been avoided if we had really just spent the time up front on relationship building and on focusing on time, turf, and trust. So in the end, my story is about my team's near and eventual win, right? I feel like so much of what we do in public health and development work really depends on solid relationships. And you just can't take it for granted that communities will want to participate in and support community-led activities. I remain amazed when it actually works out, because there's just so much that can go wrong. And so that's my story. So back over to you.
Thank you, Lenette. I'm going to pass things off to Amy, and to our attendees, if you haven't already, we'd love to know where you're joining us from today. So please include that in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Alyssa. Let me share my screen. And I also want to thank Lenette. I think, you know, kicking this off, oops, somehow my thing is advancing on its own. I love technology. Kicking things off with really recognizing that relationship and trust is so important. And I'm actually going to piggyback on what Lenette had said by providing some strategic ideas and tactics for moving those near misses into solid successes. But before I do, I wanted to share a story of my own. In 2018, I went to Afghanistan with UNICEF to work on polio eradication. And Afghanistan is one of only 2 countries that hasn't fully eradicated polio. So it's a really exciting time to be part of that last mile, right? So on my first polio eradication campaign, I really wanted to see how things were working. And these campaigns are enormous. They're nationwide, they're very time and resource intensive, and they happen about 10 times a year. And what you can see here is a picture of a vaccination team, and she's holding in that blue box the actual vaccine. But before they even get to the community, there's a big piece that has to happen, which is what social mobilizers do. They come to the community and they pass out a flyer to every single door to let them know what's happening the next week, to please open your door that these vaccinators are going to be coming. So I followed the social mobilizer team around, and then I went back into the community the next day just to sort of talk to the community and find out what they were thinking. And this is what I found. All the flyers on the ground, nothing but trash. Everybody had picked them up and immediately threw them away. You know, it's sort of that, when we talk about epidemiology and data collection, garbage in, garbage out. Well, this was like a visual garbage out. We clearly had a problem. And the success of the vaccinators depends largely on the success of the social mobilizers. So we really needed to figure out what was going on. So I sat down with the team and we had a conversation and tried to brainstorm on what was going on. But you asked, Some people said nothing went wrong, and some people said everything went wrong. There was a lot of finger blaming, finger pointing and blaming, but there was no one clear-cut consensus until we talked to the community. And the community overwhelmingly told us there's no value in this. We have been getting the same flyer at every single vaccination campaign every year for the last 10 years. There's no information in this that's useful to us. And in fact, it was actually working against the program because people were feeling like they were their time was wasted and that this wasn't valuable to them. So we ended up brainstorming with the team. I came back with this information and brainstormed with the team on what we needed to do. And for us, what we decided was that we needed to have a more value-driven approach. And if you look, this is one of the new flyers that we had designed. We decided that every campaign would have a new flyer. So 10 new flyers every year, bright new colors. And on the front of the flyer, rather than just say, we're coming to vaccinate, we really talked about each time we honed in on a specific gap or a specific question that would help the community understand the importance of vaccination. On the back is where we put the value, something that they wanted. So this particular campaign happened in the new year. So you can see we provided them with a beautiful, colorful new calendar. We did games with behavior change, prompts for the kids and recipes for the moms in conjunction with nutrition. We really wanted to make sure that there was value. So what we found is that these actually stopped being tossed on the ground. We would go into homes and see the calendar posted months later. We'd see the kids working on the games. I can't say with certainty that this improved vaccination rates, but what I can say is that we saw that families in the communities found these more valuable, and it did improve the perception of the program, which is important. So thinking about that lesson, that sort of failure that we turned into a success, I thought about what are the sort of common causes for these near misses, right? And I think that they come generally into one of three buckets: planning, skill, or value. So when we look at these a little more in depth with planning, oftentimes I'll ask a team who's asking me to help them assess a near miss, did you have a plan? And they'll show me the plan. But here's the thing, the plan maybe was very aspirational, but wasn't really practical and not easy to implement. I asked them, did you have SMART goals and objectives so that people have a real clear idea of what they need to deliver on? And a lot of people don't have those. They don't like to be pinned down because they're afraid they're going to miss. And there's a lot of value in SMART goals, but that's another conversation. But the other two pieces around planning was monitoring. Oftentimes the monitoring and evaluation really is just evaluation at the end, but proper monitoring can give you a signal when things are starting to go off the rails and you can course correct. And then lastly, I always ask, did you have a plan B? When I worked in Ebola, the Smithsonian did an interview project at the end, interviewing CDC staff as well as our locally employed staff. And they interviewed one of the pharmacists who worked for me and asked him, what's the most important thing you learned? And he said, always have a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. And you know what? He's right. That's how you can mitigate some some misses by understanding how to quickly pivot. So the other big bucket is often skill. And we do know that increased capacity increases skill, but we don't always translate that into practical things. And so, the big questions I ask when it's a near miss due to skill is, well, did your team really know what to do and how to do it? Did you identify those skill sets that they'd need to be successful and make sure they had them? Big one is, does the team have a shared definition of success? Is it cohesive and collaborative? I always tell folks, when it's big messages like success or vision or goals, you want to have that conversation, the same conversation with the same people in the same room at the same time, so that they all hear the same thing and they have this shared vision. And then finally, does your team have problem-solving skills? And this is that pivot piece, is if something goes wrong, are they able to analyze what happened and pivot quickly. And I think that the problem solving skills, the critical thinking are often our biggest challenge when it comes to skill. And then the final bucket is value. If it doesn't add value, it's a waste. And we saw that with those flyers, right? And a lot of this, I think, this bucket feeds into what Lenette was talking about with partnerships and relationships. It has to be of value, right? You need to provide value and make sure that your partners feel valuable. So you need to know, did you know what the community needed and wanted? Oftentimes we focus on the needs and neglect to understand the wants. And if we deliver something that the community doesn't want, it's not going to be successful. And then have you involved the community before and afterwards? It's really important that through the cycle of a project or a program that they are involved at every step in order for success to happen. So when you're having these conversations about near misses, they can often be slightly emotional, they can be difficult conversations. And I have a strategy I use called KISS. It's not the keep it simple, stupid, although that's great. It's the keep it strategic and supportive. So you want to create a safe space with no blaming. You want to talk about what worked first. And the thing I'll say about the safe space, I want to go back for a moment, is you want to create that as a general environment for your team so that they feel comfortable and confident in having honest conversations. Again, talk about what worked first. And then I use a strategy that HR uses in reviews, which is start, stop, continue. What do we need to start doing? What do we need to stop doing? And what's working well that we need to ensure we continue? The last piece of this is really where we get very creative, and I encourage brainstorming and a lot of creativity, no bad ideas. This is how we get collective success and buy-in, but it's also a skill building concept that helps people with their critical thinking skills. So this is when you do this KISS, the strategic and supportive environment, when you're having these conversations, it really does help a lot with your team and can move your near misses into successes as they pivot and move forward. All right, I'm not going to go into this one in depth in the spirit of time, but this is what I call the unfinished successes checklist. And you'll see at the bottom is my email, and you're welcome to email me if you would like me to send this to you. But what I will say is that there, in my mind, are 4 major buckets when you're sort of thinking about how to morph that near miss into a solid success. And the first is identifying your gaps, as well as identifying what worked, because you don't want to change something that's working. You want to ask questions about, what those gaps are around, whether it's implementing or skill sets or whatever. You want to really understand what the gaps and challenges are. And then you want to explore. This is where you do those brainstorming and creative sessions where, nothing's off the table. And then as a group, you can build consensus. And finally, you want to act on that. And the one thing I'd like to call out in the ACT piece is this first one. Develop 3 activities, no more than 3, because if you're asking your team to make changes, you want to make it feasible for them. So don't load it up with 17 changes, just 3. All right, and now I'm going to finish my talk with a little bit about professional development. When I was thinking through this, I tried to think of what are the skill sets that we really need to make sure that we have a solid grasp on in order to be able to morph those near misses into successes. And I came up with 3. The first one is building great teams. Teams that work together well are always better positioned for changing things into a success than teams that are slightly dysfunctional or than individuals working independently. And a great team is identifying what you need, finding the right people, getting them the skills, giving them the training to make them great at what they do, and then retaining them by showing value, by making sure they understand that they're valued. The second skill set is preparedness. And I come from an emergency background. We're all about preparedness. But what I mean specifically is contingency planning. This was the plan B that I was talking about earlier. And what I often do after I build the plan is I just have a table where the first column lists all the things that could go wrong. And the second column says what we'll do if that happens. And so it's a very easy, tool that you can use in the field to pivot very quickly. So if A happens, you do B. if C happens, you do D. And it just really helps to have that preparedness piece. And I think building those preparedness skills really help change course very quickly if you're finding something's not working the way you thought it would. And then finally, this one I think is going to give some folks pause, but I think it's more important to be kind than nice. And I think often as women, we struggle with this one. Now, think of the way I think about kind and nice is that nice is the wrapping paper. It's the stuff on the outside that's super pretty, but kindness is the package inside. It's ultimately what matters. Kindness is about having direct, empathetic, clear conversations rather than just glossing over things nicely. And an example I can give about this was I was working on a team where the team lead was really focused on kindness. She just wanted the team to be kind. And how that panned out was we had a team member who was an independent worker, wouldn't be collaborative. And she was hurting the team. But rather than have a kind conversation guiding this woman, instead she glossed over it by being nice. But the reality is, by being nice to this one woman, she was unkind to the team who was suffering, who had to pick up the slack. She was unkind to the program that was not succeeding as it could. And to be honest, she was being unkind to the particular woman in question because she wasn't giving her the feedback that would allow her to professionally grow. And so I think niceness is beautiful. Everybody loves a well-wrapped package, but be sure that the package isn't empty when you open it. Really hone those kindness skills. And a lot of that is about communication skills. So just the three great things as a recap would be, your team building skills, your preparedness skills, and your communication skills. And then I just have this picture because this is one of my favorite. This is what success looks like in Afghanistan. This is a child whose pinky is colored purple, meaning that she was vaccinated. And so she will not have polio. And that is ultimately the big success story in all of this. So Alyssa, I'm going to turn it back to you at this point.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm feeling very inspired after that. And your comment, Amy, about nice and kind, that's something I think, to your point, as women, we're sort of steeped in this, if you don't have anything nice, don't say anything at all kind of social structure. And I've had to do a lot of unlearning of that. As I have tried to, be better at my job. That was one of the things I need to overcome. So thank you both for sharing your stories and insight. I want to open things up for questions now. I invite the attendees to please enter your questions in the chat. Rachel, I'm going to ask that you help me keep an eye on that while I ask our panelists a few questions to get started with. So we use a lot of euphemisms when we're talking about failure. Today, I've used the word non-success. It's in our title. We've talked about unfinished success, near wins. I know those on the call who are in research will be familiar with identifying challenges and barriers. And in programs, we talk about iterative program improvement, or in M&E, we talk about lessons learned. I often find myself writing the phrase opportunities for growth in reports. And words have a lot of power. And I'm wondering if some of these things that we use really frequently could start to just be kind of glossed over. And if there is power ever in using the F word, in this case, failure, over some of these other terms, and when it might be appropriate to use them. I don't know. Lenette, you want to go first? Just because I looked up and saw your face.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think it's a problem to use the word failure and to be honest with yourself. I still do like to reframe things though, just because of the stress factor. Now, I will say, I work on a lot of programming that's funded by USAID. It comes back to building relationships. And I think building relationships early with with the AOR and the management team at USAID, and kind of planting the seed for adaptive management as an approach, so that you really can kind of fail fast and learn, and really kind of I don't know, get that out there from the beginning. So hopefully it is okay and possible to talk about failure, right? Because then you can also talk about solutions. And one of the things I really appreciated about Amy's presentation was because she talked about those solutions. So I think it's okay to talk to use the F word. I think it's okay, but you have to build that into the relationship, I think, early. Yeah.
Amy, anything to add?
Yeah, I think Lenette's spot on. I think you can talk about failure more openly and more directly when you have that relationship. The one thing as a communications person that I would suggest to folks is you can foreshadow, right? And when you foreshadow with folks, it becomes much easier to have that conversation. So if you have a really innovative program, before you even do anything, you can foreshadow, this is a pilot. We're going to find out what worked and didn't work. And there's a lot of value in that. So as you sort of seed the ground, it becomes a little easier to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. I know with, I do a lot of work in monitoring and evaluation, and sometimes it can feel punitive, and folks fear the evaluator coming in with their checklists and their clipboards. So we spend a lot of time up front talking about, we're going to have to discuss the things that don't work in order to benefit, our community. And so that's really helpful. I don't know, Rachel, if we have any other, I have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to keep going if you don't see any in the chat. It looks like, nope, I think we're good. I'm going to keep asking my own questions. So we've talked a bit today about sort of what we can do in our own work. A lot of times, when we're telling stories about near wins or non-successes, we might focus kind of in on our own personal, individual, professional development. But I'd like to get your take on how we can bring learning from non-successes into our organizations, kind of institutionalize it as just a part of the process and a part of our work. And to do so in a way that doesn't just sort of give lip service to the going through the motions, but actually to find ways to incorporate those lessons learned moving forward and change the way we do our work. Amy, I can start with you this time.
Sure. Honestly, I feel like it depends, excuse me, a great deal on the organization. Some organizations are culturally much more open to the fast fails, and some organizations are very conservative. And I've worked in both. And what I will say is, for conservative organizations, it's often better to start small at a team and really build that team, build the team's excitement in this process and their ownership in the progressive successes, and then hawk the heck out of that, right? Really give your team all the props and show the value of it as a story around leadership. For organizations that are more open to this, it's a lot easier. You can almost start culturally from the top down rather than the bottom up. Lenette, I see you nodding. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, like a norm shifting intervention. Sometimes you have to do that in your organization. And I think your approach of starting with, the bright spots, starting with your own team and then spreading out is one way. I also think too, in those kind of conservative organizations, it's just like any other norm. You got to get it out there and start talking about it, and really advocating for methods that really lend themselves to learning or improving, and not just evaluating, improving, right? Especially, creating a safe space where, there's not, your donors aren't there, they're not listening into these dialogues, but creating spaces for people to swap tales is a good way to get those norms to shift.
Thank you. We've got a question from Rachel. Let's see, have you seen gender differences in response to failure? Are quote unquote failures from women perceived by organizations and stakeholders differently than if they were failures by men, for example?
One of the, go ahead, Lenette.
No, go ahead.
One of the things I have noticed is that women are often harder on themselves when it comes to failure than men are. And that sort of does break my heart a little bit when I'm in the field and I have this really talented woman who's just going to take the weight of the world on her shoulders. It's like, oh, don't. And we need to sort of build up that confidence. And again, I think that comes to sort of getting rid of the, I'm just going to take the hit and I'm going to be nice and, sort of really working through that. I've worked in very male-centric environments like Afghanistan, where I do find that sometimes it's a little easy to place blame on the silent gender. And I think we just need to be very culturally appropriate, but clear where things are and not allow that sort of blame, that gender-based blame to continue.
Yeah, Amy, I was going to say exactly that women are so much harder on themselves than males. I've seen that over and over and over again. And I'm wondering if it has to also, if there's some kind of connection to that imposter syndrome that women tend to have a little bit more of than men. I don't know, but it is true. I don't have any clear-cut examples of or concrete examples of a time when something happened and women, well, I'm talking in the binary too, by the way, but where one gender was I guess dismissed, or it was expected, or I don't know, I'm at loss for a concrete example. Alyssa, do you have any? You're asking that question. Does an example come to your mind?
I feel like I have certainly a lot of examples that I can think of across different power dynamics, be they based on gender or race or age or education level, which is one I feel like I see a lot in global health, who's listened to kind of depends on how many letters they have behind their name. So yeah, I see that a lot. And it feels like, the big theme from this discussion is all around that relationship building place, providing spaces for folks to, feel comfortable, and looking at ways that you can build that into your design, be they programmatically or research design or an M&E design, that it allows you to both assess those power dynamics, but then also allow space for those who might not be as high on the scale to participate in a meaningful way.
And if I can just add one thing to this,
Yeah.
Lenette and I have both talked about safe space. I think as you build a culture in your team of a safe space, women who are less confident are going to feel more confident about giving their opinions and not owning things that aren't theirs to own, and owning things that are theirs to own, right? And so I think a lot of this comes down to building the culture that facilitates this kind of equity.
Yeah, we hear safe space, and something I've been hearing a lot in the last year is brave space.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, I'm gonna check. I have trouble sort of going back and forth. I get caught up in our conversation and forget about my role. I've got another question for you guys. Do you have any examples of groups or organizations, agencies in the global health space that you feel like are doing a really good job of learning from non-successes? And what are the things that are making them successful? Any ideas? Or maybe some that don't do a great job, and why? Really careful about
I'm not going to call anybody out on being bad.
No, of course not.
What I can say is I've worked with some smaller, I'm out in California, and so we have a lot of these smaller global organizations that are that really value innovation. I think they, as a culture, are more open to that failure turning into and lessons learned. And I do find that the smaller ones are able to be a little more nimble and a little more innovative than some of the larger ones that just have a huge machine. It's harder to, it's easier to turn a canoe than it is to turn the Titanic, right? And so my experience with these small ones, they are really very innovative and fast forward.
Yeah, I will add to that in saying I have seen that organizations that have really adopted a set of like feminist leadership principles, such as self-awareness and dismantling bias, inclusion, sharing power, those having that kind of feminist leadership mindset from the get-go, way more open to talking about failure and appreciating also the learning aspect of just program implementation and monitoring, evaluation, things that can go wrong. And I think, like a behemoth like Save the Children, huge organization that I work for, although we do have we have some teams that really kind of embrace this feminist leadership approach, and other teams that don't. It just depends on the leadership. It depends on their comfort level. Yeah. So not even with I guess what I'm trying to say is not, even within an organization, there's going to be a mixture. It's always a mixed bag.
Oh yeah, sure. Even within a team, from one project to the next, you can have a really big difference. Lenette, earlier you were talking about creating, a brave space or a safe space for talking about failure. And mentioned, okay, well, we don't have our donors in the room. What about when we do have our donors in the room? How do we talk with them about our non-successes without diminishing their confidence in us? And also, Amy, you talked a bit, I'm going to give you guys a double-barreled question here, about the need for the Plan B. How do we get donors to pay for the Plan B when Plan A doesn't work out?
That's a great question. So with donors, I tend not to be as failure overt. I do tend to frame things in opportunities and lessons learned. I often talk about next steps. I also, the one thing that I do, and this is just me, and Lenette, feel free to disagree, but I also frame a lot of this in evidence-based, right? That we, this is what we learned. Here's the evidence for our next steps. And, funding the Plan B can be a challenge. If you can implement some small tactical Plan Bs to illustrate the value of it before you go back to your donors, it does help.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Amy. And, and just in the context of social and behavior change, space that I operate in, complexity really matters. You're working with multiple stakeholders, each with their own interests and concerns. Little things in funding or implementation or capacity or logistics or staffing, any of these things can do a whammy on your project. I think, in terms of when you're having those conversations with your own team, go ahead and be sloppy, go ahead and be vulnerable, go ahead and not have all the answers. But man, when you're in front of those funders, you need to be able to connect the dots. And it takes some preparation, just like any presentation. It takes some preparation. You need to have those solutions in your back pocket. And I think too, in what I said before, in building that relationship with your donor, it's good to know how risk adverse your AOR or your management team is going to be. Are they going to give you the freedom to fail fast, or do they need you just to be successful? So kind of figuring that out from the get-go is good, because then you can really kind of frame your success and failures that way.
Thank you, guys. I have one last question to ask you, rapid fire, 1 minute. If there was one thing that you would hope the people that are attending today's webinar would do as a result of this conversation, what would it be?
Try it, and if it doesn't work, pick yourself up and dust yourself off. Just try.
Yeah.
Just try it out. I mean, that's the only way we're going to learn anything.
Be brave, right? Don't be so frightened of failure. Be brave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good advice to end on.
Easier said than done, of course.
Of course. We're all works in progress, working towards being our best selves. So thank you guys very much for being here. It's been great just for me personally to be able to have this conversation with you both. I know that our attendees learned a lot from being here. And before we sign off, I am just going to hand things over really quickly to Lauren Abrams, who's going to give us a quick update on any upcoming Women in Global Health events.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much, Amy and Lenette, for sharing your non-successes with us today. I personally am definitely going to have to sort of reiterate to be brave and not be afraid of failure, because it's a challenge for a lot of us. And thank you so much, Alyssa, for bringing this event together and for moderating it. My name is Lauren Abrams, and I'm the program's chair of Women in Global Health Georgia. And I want to let everybody know about an upcoming joint event with the other Women in Global Health USA chapters led by the DC chapter that's coming up. And it's called Putting Women and Girls First, Assessing the National Strategy on Gender Equity and Equality. And this event will feature key US government, global health and foreign policy leaders who are going to provide an overview of the new gender strategy released by the Biden-Harris administration and talk about how the community can support the efforts to roll out the strategy. So this event will be on March 24th from 4 to 5:30 p.m. And we hope that everyone can join us. Thanks so much for being here today.